I've been interested about like genetic modification and specifically like where should we draw the line on changing our genes, or where should we draw the line on genetic modification? And I kind of separated it into a sort of five categories. So on one end of the spectrum, you've got the people that are in like critical condition, that removing in altering or removing a gene, it would prevent them to have early onset Alzheimer's, something like that. Then next on the spectrum, I think you've got this like this reducing the risk um of getting something serious. So I've got here the example is enhancing someone's bone density to prevent osteoporosis. Then you've kind of got this middle thing, which is when I think it starts to get a bit sticky, of adding a desired characteristic to make that, adding something desired to make your child a bit taller, to make your child 6 foot. And then I've got the next category, which would be like choosing aesthetics. So it like making your child have like blue eyes instead of brown. And then finally, I've got this like post-human modification where you add something that humans can't already do right now, and you kind of expand the human potential. So you add like, you make it so that your kid can see in the dark, have night vision, or you give them, I don't know, some sort of like a sixth finger or something. And so then I think the first question that comes to mind is, where's the line between why is it okay? Yeah, so the first question is sort of like, where's the line? Why is it okay to prevent someone from having Alzheimer's, but not okay to add a sixth finger onto your child?
Hmm. I think it's an interesting discussion. I would say my gut feels that anything like any genetic modification that happens like pre the birth. So like you said, being able to like imagine you're a couple that's expecting a child, and you can go into some like healthcare place and have your new child genetically screened from in the womb, and then make modifications to, like you said, eye color, hair color, or even like, they have a they might have a genetic disorder, and altering that pre-birth. There's a part of me that's hesitant about that. I mean, if it's done like, is there a way it can be done correctly? You could argue, yes, maybe getting relieving a child of genetically driven diseases and disorders when they're born is an ethical thing to do. But then there's a sort of assumption behind that those that live with that genetically driven disorder that are currently still here, that they're any worse than the average person. There is that we get into a weird gray area like that, like a if you could correct, let's say, your child having Down syndrome before they're born through genetic modification, maybe you want to do that. But does that mean then that is that fair to people that are born with Down syndrome, or maybe that was the path that they were supposed to have in the universe and their parents were supposed to have? It all gets complicated, and I don't really know. But I just say anything pre-birth like that, my gut starts to churn a little bit and goes no. Especially, I'm immediately disregarding things like aesthetics and stuff like that, because that's ego, and it's not really, it just doesn't really seem right. It's right at all to me. And then when you're talking about this matrix type shit of like adding characteristics automatically to people, it would be a lot more complicated than that, because the genes for those things have to actually exist. We have to find them. We have to know what they are. Maybe, you draw in genes from other animals. I don't know. Like, can you create a human that has echolocation using the genetics of a bat? I don't know. I'm just playing with ideas. But that obviously that's going to be something that's far, 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 far off in the future if we're going to be able to do that. And when I say Matrix type shit, I think about the scene in the Matrix where like he can just download the skills of karate. Do you know what I mean? And he's just able to do it. Um, but when you're talking about genetic modification of people who are alive who do have a risk of something like, I don't know, like diabetes or a certain type of cancer, would it then be right to, I don't know, let's say a girl is born and she's screened and she has a genetic predisposition to breast cancer? Maybe, and these genetic predispositions are a point where it's like there's a 50% or more chance that they'll develop breast cancer at some point in their life. Is it then right to change those genes? My gut is more happy with that. So that's not, I know I haven't given you a very scientific answer there, but I feel like that's just where my intuition stands on things.
No, it's not a scientific question. It's more of a philosophy question, I feel. Um, so
Here's,
your stance is more like not at birth, but after birth. You think is better.
I just think it just gets a bit complicated, and I get all a bit philosophical or maybe religious about it and go, are we intervening with God's plan in whatever way that is in
Mm.
our, like, okay, there are extreme cases, right? Somebody's will be born with a genetically driven disorder that makes their life full of way more suffering. Okay, for sure. Like, maybe it would be great to intervene and do something about that. But just from a personal perspective, right now, my disability is not driven by genetics, but let's just suppose hypothetically that it was, and we lived in a world where my mum could have me genetically screened while I was in the womb, and it flagged up that I would be born with cerebral palsy, or replace that with any sort of genetic driven version, and she had the choice to remove it, right? If she removed it, I would be born and I would be a completely different human being to who I am today, because my cerebral palsy has driven many life decisions. It's opened many doors that I've walked through. Yes, it's closed some, but I think it's opened more doors than it's closed, and it's molded me into the person I am. So do we have the right to alter somebody's genetics before birth if whatever those genetics are supposed to manifest in their life actually are like key key drivers of their life story, and then we're sort of altering their life story? Does that make sense?
Mm. Mm. Because that is, yeah, that's also a context I thought about. If someone could prevent you having that cerebral palsy, would
Mm.
you get it done before birth? Would you get it done now? You've
I
probably
don't think
thought about that before.
Yeah, I don't think I could. But I mean, I understand I'm in a very privileged position because, like, especially just in my sport, I know many people who are far less able and functional than I am. And I know that for them, it would be a no-brainer that they definitely have their like disability removed, because there's just so many roadblocks that the average person doesn't think about that they have to deal with because they're, I don't know, paralyzed, or they're a um, really high amputation in their legs that goes through the hip, or they've got spina bifida to a really bad level. They've never walked, or those kind of things. I'm a weird case where I'm still kind of functional. I just walk a bit funny, and I don't like walking long distances because it's painful and uncomfortable. So I would turn the doctor down if he had the syringe. But
Mm.
yeah, I think that questions like that have to be an individual case.
Yeah, with the kind of examples I laid out, there is something in it where I think that there's a weird line between problem and desire, and that it's kind of two sides of the same coin. Because who's like you kind of think about it and you think, okay, when you start adding sort of aesthetics and desired characteristics, then you start to think that's moves out of being a problem into a desire. But those things are still quite closely linked. Like, is it a problem if your kid's like 3 foot? Is it a problem if they're 8 foot? If they're kind of on the extreme of that, and you want, or is it a desire that that you want them to be 6 foot? It's kind of it's just it's one of those. It's I don't know how right you can be, but I'm actually a little. I think I'm a bit more for the like the modification when you're born than maybe you are. I know you are messing with fate, but if you can give them a higher probability of having a good fate, then I think I'm down for it. And
But
you are messing
how
with
do you
God's work a
know
little bit.
how do you know that, like, your trivial example of height would lead to a better outcome? How do you know that? You don't. That comes from
Mm,
your bias that being taller is being better, but it may not be. And the majority of the time, when I say the majority, I literally mean 99.5% of the time or whatever, something crazy. People are just born within the normal distribution. Yes, some people are 5'7", some people are 6'2",
mm.
whatever, but we're all in the same kind of bracket. Um, and I don't know if you can give me a real coherent argument and tell me that an aesthetic characteristic will mean somebody has a 100% guaranteed or close to that better life, then maybe I get on board with it. But
Yeah,
do you want to be that person with the perfect attractive physical characteristics? Okay, maybe you do, right? Maybe there is truth to the halo effect, this psychological bias that people that are more aesthetically attractive have better outcomes in life. But you hear stories of especially like female celebrities that have been like actresses or supermodels and things like this, or like music artists. When they get older and they lose their like physical looks, or they lose the quality of their physical looks, they they have a kind of crisis of self there because they're so used to going into rooms and people paying attention to them for how they look on the outside, and then actually they realize that no one really gives much of a shit about who they are on the inside, which is who we truly are. So do you go
mm,
around living more superficial relationships with people because they're with you because they find you attractive? Like it's such a this is so much more complicated because what we think might be the ideal or better outcome sometimes isn't, if that makes
yeah.
sense.
I feel like that's quite a good perspective to take. You shouldn't mess with the outside. You should only mess with the inside. So
Well, but I don't
something
think you should mess with the inside. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that?
I mean, like, oh, my lungs are like pretty bad, and I need to fix something up. I mean, that kind of gets away from genetic modification, maybe.
But you can go anywhere with that, right? Let's say somebody they screen you for a genetic, that you have a predisposition for a genetic disorder with the lungs, okay, or whatever, right?
Mm.
For lung cancer, okay, and you screen that baby, so there's a much lower chance they develop lung cancer. But what if in their lifetime they were supposed to develop lung cancer so that they go through the treatment and it teaches them the lessons and they become a nicer, more grateful person throughout the process? Now, I'm not like casting light on people that go through cancer, obviously not. I'm just trying to to point to the complexity of this, that our life isn't just a series of like mutually exclusive events that just happen. Everything interacts with everything else. Like you are who you are because of the shit you've been through. And if we try to take away people's capacity to go through shit, I think we also take away their capacity to grow and find meaning.
Mm. Yeah, I
But
think
you don't want the perfect life. The perfect life is the imperfect life made perfect through growth, you know?
mm, the outcome is quite dystopian. If we're taking kind of my like side of things, of my devil's advocate type of arguments, of like the outcome would be just everyone looks beautiful slash identical, and there's a very loss of individuality
It's a
because
bit Brave New World like, yeah.
um but also, I mean, on the surface of it, it sounds good. If I have a
Oh,
better
yeah.
kid, if my kid's more better looking, they're gonna go through school and they're gonna have lots of friends and they're gonna have relationships and they're going to have more attention. If they have more attention, they have better relationships, then they're going to be better socialized and they're going to be they're going to be able to talk themselves and to find opportunities. And if they can find opportunities, then they're going to make money and they're going to be comfortable and have a nice life. Um, but there's also the side of things that that's not what happens in reality.
Mm.
In
'Cause
reality, people get used to having stuff handed, and we know that.
100%.
Um,
I mean, how beneficial is a comfortable upbringing? That's a complicated question because you don't want to be the
mm,
kid who's born in a household where unfortunately like they're on the lower end of the socioeconomic scale, and their parents have to struggle, or parent singular has to struggle to just put food on the table and pay the bills. But you also don't want to be, people I've known at the secondary school I went to who had such rich parents that they had no worries like that whatsoever. Because then they're cut off from character development. It's like, how much comfort do you actually want? And like, I don't, it sounds like I'm talking about myself a lot, and I'm not trying to. I just think it's a really good example that if you took me as a fetus and was like, okay, you could somehow figure out that this kid was going to have a physical disability, and you went, actually, it would be more ideal if he didn't, because if he was able-bodied, he would go through less pain and he wouldn't have to take time out of school for surgery, and he would find life a lot easier just traveling around. Um, but without my disability, I think potentially I'd be worse off in life right now, because the great position I feel like I'm in and the happiness, the sources of happiness that I have in my life have come as a consequence of doors that have opened primarily because I'm a young person with a disability. So it's just like, it's right. It's how much. So, you've got an awareness of the book Frankenstein, right?
Yeah.
Um, it's a little bit of that. I mean, the theme in that book that we drew when I studied it, English literature, was that it was based on the mythological story of Prometheus, who was a guy that was so intelligent and tried to be like God. I think he tried to, I don't know, did something to do with fire. I'm not quite sure on this. I want to research it a little bit more. But he was basically advancing and advancing so much that he believed he was a god, and then he sort of, I think God sort of struck him down or whatever. He came to a painful fate, right? And there's a little bit of that in this conversation. I feel you mess with nature too much. We don't really know why things happen the way they do, and if we mess with that too much, are we trying to challenge God? And is that a smart thing to do?
Wait, is Prometheus in the Frankenstein story, or is that a different story?
No, it's a different story, but
Okay.
Victor Frankenstein in the story is like a Promethean type character. I've just googled it quickly now. So Prometheus story is a Greek myth about the Titan Prometheus who created humanity and stole fire from the gods. And the act of rebellion earned him the wrath of Zeus, who punished Prometheus by chaining him to a mountain where an eagle daily ate his liver, a torment he endured for eternity. So basically, yeah, he created humanity but stole fire from the gods. He stole from the gods,
Mm.
and this act of rebellion led to sort of his demise and his eternal torture. And that's, I don't know, when I think about this idea of screening people and changing people before we're born and messing with people's trajectory in life, are we stealing from the gods or stealing from fate?
Yeah, it's I think it's not the work of God at all. It's an endless desire. There's this Plato line that's like, if a painter paints a picture of an ideally beautiful man, complete to the last detail, um, can basically such a man like exist? Like, can he actually paint that? Like, is that possible? And it reminds me of like the like picture of Dorian Gray.
Mm.
It reminds me of stories like that. In reality, I think if we were to do this, I think it would we would mess with it so much that it would get unhealthy, and it's a horrible dystopia. Is there any like details? Because I'm not very well versed in the Frankenstein story. Is there any things that you picked up when you read Frankenstein that you thought were interesting?
Yeah. So Frankenstein is structured in an interesting way, right? Because it's a complete perspective shift halfway through. So, like the first however many chapters, you are, it's written from the perspective of the scientist, Victor Frankenstein. And then I want to say it's from something near chapter 10 onwards, we get the monster's perspective, which I really like. Because basically it leads you to question who is the evil character in the narrative? Who is the actual monster? Because the first 10 chapters are about like Victor's upbringing and his thirst for knowledge in science and his process of creating life, his drive to create life, and how he creates this monster based on digging up graves and taking like disembodied corpses and putting them together, and then he uses electricity and all this. And then it shifts to the monster's perspective of the event of him being born and this sort of infantile uh, infantile nature of the creature, in that he doesn't understand where he is or who he is, and he has to figure out language. Well, firstly, he runs away, right? Because with how he looks physically, everyone's afraid of him and everyone sort of treats him with malice. and so he runs away and goes into hiding, and then he he lives in, like, I want to say, a barn or like an outbuilding of a family, and he listens to their conversations and he learns language and he picks up a few books. But you realize that he's a sensitive soul, and even though he looks disgusting on the outside, he's a being that just wants to be connected to others like everyone does. And so then you begin to question, well, is Victor, the scientist, actually the evil character for creating life and neglecting it? So that book challenges a lot of our thoughts on prejudice and like aesthetics and not judging a book by its cover, so to speak, and questioning the morality of morality of pursuing science to such a far degree like that, and challenging the gods by trying to be creating life ourselves rather than, you know, God is the only thing that can give and take life, so to speak. It's violating that rule and that writing. It's interesting.
Does that have similarities with the story of Beauty and the Beast?
I guess you could argue it does.
Mm.
It has the same theme that, yeah, the beast on the outside is actually a very tender soul. He's just encased in his violent, well, encased in his dangerous looking aesthetics, I guess. And then that contrasts with Gaston, who on the outside, you know, is a muscular man with beautiful hair, and he's a great hunter, and he's everyone's favorite guy in inverted commas, but really he's an asshole. He's a narcissist. And he's not the one that ultimately gets the girl in the narrative. The one who gets the girl is the beast on the outside, but that's actually a very tender, kind soul on the inside. So yeah, there's similarities between like that, the problem of bias and prejudice.
And you played. Who did you play when you performed Beauty and the Beast in GCSE?
Well, yeah. So it was my first year of sixth form, year 12. I was the clock. I was Cogsworth the clock.
And
And
what
then
did you learn?
mate, that was huge though. That was huge for like my getting over social anxiety. God,
Yeah,
it was.
repeat what you did.
So I played. I did a school production, but the story is I didn't go to school throughout the whole of year 11 for a variety of reasons in my private life. And then I returned back to the same secondary school for sixth form, and it was like very, very anxiety inducing because number one, it's the post-lockdown, post-COVID world where everyone's kind of changed a lot and not really seen each other. But two, I was even more so in that sort, because I hadn't been there for year 11. So behind every conversation I had with someone was like me worrying that the "where have you been" question was going to come up, and I'd have to explain myself and all that. And so I was a little bit isolated and a bit very anxious. And I decided to do the school production. And I got the part of Cogsworth, who's like the clock in the castle and Beauty and the Beast, and just working with people on a drama production and then performing it did wonders for my social confidence, because I don't know, there's something about it. Being on stage playing a character made it easier to be Joel, something like that. So it's a side of my life that I miss. I don't do it at all anymore.
And what did you learn from the clock?
He was anxious as fuck as well. That's basically his character. Genuinely like genuinely, man. He was like quite a posh, like servant type vibe, but he was just riddled with anxiety about everything. He was like the one that was scared of the beast crashing out everyone. That's basically his job, was to stop the beast crashing out, but the beast would still crash out anyway. So yeah.
Okay, that's quite interesting. I think we steered away a bit, but
That's
I
okay.
um I think we've done a good job though, because we've given people the kind of different thoughts about sort of genetic modification, and it's they can sort of think what they want about it. I think we've outlined the good perspectives quite well. But I hear you've got a massive point. So if you want to take it away.
Yeah. So my point is split into three parts, and I think I'm going to pause after each part to see if you have any thoughts on them. And I guess it goes in a structure of: the first point outlines the problem, the second point is a suggestion of what one should do to confront the problem, and the third bit is why confronting the problem is important and beneficial, right? So the first point I got from Alex O'Connor, who I really like at the moment. He's a good role model for me, and he's a role model that feels like he's not like a role model like say a Jordan Peterson or an Ian McGilchrist is a role model because they're like multiple decades older than me, and their world that they grew up in as a 20-year-old is so different to mine. Whereas Alex is 5 or 6 years older than me, so he's a role model that's within grasp. Does that make sense? And he was on Diary CEO, who I don't really like to be honest. But he did a like 3 hour conversation with
Why don't
Alex.
you like him?
You what?
Why don't you like him?
I just think he's sold out a bit, and I just don't really enjoy his content anymore. But recently, I don't know if you saw it. I suggest if you haven't, you have a listen to it, Jake. It's a 3 hour
Mm.
conversation with Alex O'Connor, a Christian guy called Greg. I can't remember his second name, and Dr. K, who's like
Mm.
a spiritual scientist guy. Those three in conversation with like Stephen Bartlett talking about God and meaning and purpose. And Alex said a couple of things that I took away, but the main one, which is this problem that I want to pose today, is he said, in the pursuit of meaning and in purpose and finding purpose, it's always down to you as an individual. And the way he posed it was when it comes to like scientific knowledge, right? Let's say knowledge about the world, every generation is superior to the generation previous to it. Because like let's consider like our society, our culture, that knowledge increases over time, just generally, right? Since the scientific revolution or whatever, every time a child is born, you're kind of teaching them the current knowledge about the world. And as that expands throughout their lifetime, they then have kids, and those kids are taught the basic knowledge about the world. But each time that process happens, the worldview and our understanding gets better and better and better to the point where, like nowadays, you can teach a 12-year-old things that Galileo or Leonardo da Vinci or these great thinkers could never even conceptualize. Does that make sense? It's like we're all standing on the shoulders of giants. Basic facts about the world that we live on a spherical planet and we're not the center of the universe, that we orbit a sun. Those facts were not known to people hundreds of years ago, but to a child now, they can learn that very quickly. It's like that. It's like it scales and scales and scales and scales in terms of knowledge about the physical world. But the point Alex made is that when it comes to answering the existential problem of being human, you can't do that. Like if my dad or my mum tried to explain to me what life means, number one, if they did, they're just imprinting their worldview on me, which is different to mine because they're a different individual. But two, people that really seem like they've understood meaning and their purpose in life seem to say that it's very ineffable and very hard to put into words and very hard to explain to another person. It's something you have to discover for yourself. And it's the one particular line that Alex said in the podcast, which I really like. He said, with every individual, the solution to the existential problem of being human is reset. It's like once you're born, you can't stand on the shoulder of giants and really know what you're here to do. You have to figure that out for yourself. It's not something that can be explained through history. We have philosophy that helps us. We have psychology that helps us. We have history books to read about great people that have great lessons. But in terms of the actual process of discovering what feels fulfilling to us, that resets with every individual in every generation. So I'll pause there.
Mm. Yeah, existence isn't solved like a maths problem.
No.
Um, I think life is a dance between the rational and the irrational, and these I'd put that's in the context of meaning, which you've spoke about, and I'd also put that with things like love and like God, these intangibles that you can't scientifically explain. And
Mhm.
so we need to understand that life isn't just this scientific rational experience, which a lot of people who critique us they use that. And I'm a firm believer that there's more of a metaphysical, like intangible like concepts out there that we live in. Um, is there anything else I want to add? Um, yeah, reason is an excellent thing. the reason only satisfies the rational side of man's nature. I think that's what I want to think about it.
Mm.
And by just kind of focusing on that, we reduce. It's reductionist. It's that's what it's putting down. Whereas like the other side of things like glow all the way up. Um, yeah, I think that's the only thing I'd add. I agreed like so far what you're saying, what Alex is saying.
Well, it's like our future children, right? If we want to be able to explain Pythagoras' theorem to them, we can, because it's like it's a logical set of principles about how physical reality works. These lines on this triangle equal this because that's just how it is. That's nature. Um, but if you try to explain to your kid what matters in life, you can't do that. They have to find that for themselves, because what matters for me, right, will be different to my son or daughter, just because they're a different individual, different interests and different circumstances. And I like that a lot. With every individual, the solution to the existential problem of being human is reset. We cannot rely on our ancestors or the great thinkers that came before us. We have to read with philosophy, grapple with these great ideas, and come to the conclusion ourselves. Now,
Mm.
what do we do about this problem? Now, I've been reading a lot of Jung's work at the moment, and he kind of, well, this particular chapter I was reading made sense to put in here as a sort of as a potential what to do about this. And the chapter I was reading is about the archetype of rebirth, okay, and how the narrative of rebirth, or the process of rebirth, or I guess you can use rebirth and transformation as synonymous terms here. How this archetype is so integral to being a human that it's, in its nature it's archetypal. We understand it without having to be taught it. We recognize it in others. We recognize it in media, and it's always present. Now, the way that Jung sees it, and I wonder if people listening will resonate with this, is he said there is always a guiding voice or a guiding force in you. He calls it the friend of the soul. And this is the thing that if you ask yourself a question, that's the thing that answers. Because often we ask ourselves reflective questions and answers just seem to pop into our brain, or they bubble up from the unconscious. And it seems to come from somewhere that's separate to our ego, right? That's that friend of the soul. That's that version of us that is who we are, but we haven't attained it yet, like in completely, right? It's well, Jung says here, and I directly quote him in my notes, it's who we also are and yet can never attain completely. It's the inner friend of the soul. This is like the ideal self, I guess. And we do have this kind of this drive to become that thing. And even if people find that a bit woo-woo and abstract, I'll try and like concretize it for you. If you do things you know you're not supposed to do, right? You just like eat crisps and sit around. You don't feel good, do you? Anyone who claims that they feel good in that situation is probably lying, because there's a force in you that wants you to be better, that calls you to do stuff, that stimulates your interest. And that is like the guiding force towards transformation that is inside you. And our inner relationship with that force and following it and taking time and presence to notice it, that is the solution to like the existential problem of being human. Follow the things that call to you. And it may seem like something outside is calling to you, some vocation, some interest that you have, but that has to first resonate with something inside you, with that inner friend of the soul, with that ideal self. It has to resonate, and then you're driven to pursue it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, can you repeat the bit about being the reborn kind of archetype thing?
Yeah. So like that, this idea of good question is who you are now, and this kind of force inside you that desires to be manifested, this ideal self, this inner friend of the soul, going from where you are now to that thing, that is the process of transformation. That is the process of rebirth. Your life is a constant evolution of different of your character, I guess. And each time you get closer and closer and closer and closer to that thing, that person that you ultimately are. Now, Jung believes that we already are that person. We just have to manifest them in the world. And that's what the process of individuation is, where we integrate all the parts of our psyche to become that that final self. But that
Mm,
narrative, I guess, or that process of rebirth and transformation is archetypal because we understand it without having to be taught it. We understand that the fact that the phoenix burns and becomes ashes and then is reborn from the ashes, that makes sense to us. That's okay. Or we understand that um, the average people can transform into something great, right? That's why we love superhero movies. That's why we love Harry Potter, right? How there's a kid who lives in a cupboard under the stairs at his auntie's house who he hates can become like the greatest wizard. We understand that that's possible because transformation and rebirth is happening all around us. It's in nature, right? It's in the way that the seasons transform and the way that the leaves fall off the trees but then regrow in spring, or how the weather transforms and how the night and day cycle transforms. Everything around us is being reborn constantly, constant evolution, constant change, and we are no different. Um, and so the solution to this existential problem of being human is to transform yourself, not for any vain egoic reason, but because that's what you're called to do internally, and externally by what pulls you in, what interests you, what people catch your eye, or what things catch your eye, and you're like, that's what I need to follow. And yes, that takes presence and it takes stillness to notice it, but I do believe it's there.
mm. No, that makes a lot more sense. So you've kind of got these things throughout history that we've got better at. We've got better at science, we've got better at maths, we've got better at these domains. But the question of what's important in life, or how do I find meaning, or how do I find love,
Who do I need
that
to become?
that hasn't like been concretized in our knowledge. So we that problem resets, like you said, and you then pose the solution to kind of like a cyclical rebirth, like to keep doing it, and you get to a certain part, and your higher self kind of edges you on, and you then go on again, and it's like it's an infinite game. Um, and those answers aren't something that we can just take from history.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I don't want to add anything else. Um, yeah, I'll just add actually. I think this is something that's really baked into the human experience, and I think about this a lot as well with like the differences between men and women, and how men are very obsessed with the usefulness of ideas and utility and kind of like status, and men are very good at the physical world, and we're good at leadership, and we're good at manufacturing.
Mm.
But women instead are more interested in seeing the good in things, so their intuition is more developed, and their they once they find the good in something, they become very loyal to it. And um so I think like to be a woman is, you're more emotional, you're more maybe in tune with the metaphysical.
Mm.
um that's why they're better nurturers and better teachers.
Well,
um
I think you're right in that, like, men are way more terrible at understanding themselves,
mhm.
and I think that does take an inner sensitivity. And I think even intuitively, like, talking about an idea like this to a bloke our age, they would just be like, "What are you on about, bro?" Like, it's almost like there's this automatic like battering off of ideas, like that's stupid. Whereas I
Mm.
feel like, generally speaking, obviously, um, females are more open to these kind of things. And that's why I think they're right. I remember there's a friend of mine whose mum said something so wise once to me. She was like, "Formal society is ran by men, but informal society is ran by women. That the informal world of emotion and of desire and of love and of connection to spirit and to nature and the unconscious and the psyche and the psychological world, that's more feminine because that's where creation comes from. Like, that's where growth comes from. That's the divine feminine." And she said that to me, and it just smacked me in the face. And I was like, "Yes, so right." Um, but yeah, like, it's interesting because I'm really trying to figure out, how do I get the average person who like might block this idea because it's still unconscious in them. They haven't quite realized it. How do I get it across to them? And I think it is true that there's like an internal like measure of how well are you doing in your life, and it does impact your emotions and your sense of self-esteem and all of that. It's like there is this, when you're on the right path, you feel it. You feel momentum, you feel
Mm.
joy, you
You're
feel the
aligned.
flow state, you feel lighter, you feel more open and expansive. And when you're taking the wrong path, you feel dark, you feel depressed, you're struggling for energy. And that is the push and the pull, the calling and conscious of this inner friend of the soul within you. Like when I'm talking on the podcast like this, I get G'd up. It doesn't matter how much sleep I've had or how much caffeine I've had. I want to be here. It feels right. It feels meaningful. Whereas if I sat around all day, there would be this pull inside me to just stop feeling sorry for myself and just wasting away and to go and do something. And that's not me doing that. That's something in my unconscious. That's the drive for transformation. Um, and
Mm.
and because it's unconscious, it doesn't become truly like acknowledged and incorporated because until we make it conscious, until we figure it out. And that's the bit that I struggle with. How do you try and ignite that in people?
Mm. I feel like this friend of the soul is kind of like it's the will. It's this
Yes.
drive that you just kind of step up to. Um, yeah, I mean this is the problem that we're solving, right? How do we make it useful and accessible to the average person? Um,
I think the best answer ultimately is um like be the example in the world. Do it. Be that person.
mm,
Be the individual that is as integrated as they possibly can be and tries to manifest that ideal self in the world as much as possible. Because whoever you are and whatever you do have a circle of influence on the world. And that's different to being an influencer that, fucking advertise products on Instagram. That's not what I mean by an influencer. I mean that you have a job, right? Or if you don't have a job, you have a family, or you have a friend group, or you have acquaintances that you see on the bus every day or whatever. And you can impact those people, even if it's not through words, trying to explain things you've learned, like I stupidly do on this podcast. It's about being, your way of being in the world. That does affect people. It does. So I guess that's the
mm,
best answer because I don't think you can like ram it. If something's unconscious, right? Let's say this archetype of transformation is unconscious in somebody. You can't just use words and try and ram down their throat for them to like understand it and stimulate that in them. They have to realize it for themselves. And maybe they'll only do that by seeing it, by feeling it, by like acknowledging your way of being. And
mm,
that somehow ignites something. I know I've had that experience meeting certain people,
mm.
and then you see the way they live their life or the way they conduct themselves in a specific vocation, and you go, whoa, that could be me. That's crazy. There's more potential to this.
Yeah, I remember. Mm, I think you said before about how you're like you have like a feminine like personality characteristics, and we talk about a lot of like more like feminine like ideas, but well, like I don't want to categorize it into that. I don't but like I remember posting like a clip about you saying how moving to London like rumbled you to your core,
Mm,
and all the and I think that's a good example. But the people in the comments don't get it. They
no.
they just don't get. They just repeat that and then comment that phrase rumbling to the core. um,
But that's okay, Like it's okay because I feel my life very deeply. Okay. And that's a blessing and a curse, let's say, because I have this proclivity to overthink. You know, me and my girlfriend call it the House of Commons. It's like I've got a parliament in my own brain that are always debating something and always thinking deeply about something. I can't just switch off and be surface level. You know, I do have this like this. I just feel things on quite a deep level, or I overanalyze it, or I use fancy terminology to describe it. But that feeling of being rumbled to the core is real to me.
mm,
And if people don't agree, then that's fine, because they just may not feel things as deeply, and that can be a good thing. You know what I mean? I'm not shitting on that. That it's probably easier emotionally.
I think
Like,
that's what it is.
mate, the fact that people, I don't like. Maybe it's my neurodivergence or whatever that I have, right? But I don't understand how people can just carry on and not think about shit. Like they can just go through the motions and go through the routine of life. Do you understand what I mean by that? Like, I see people out and about. Just I can visibly see in their body language and in their face that they're battling through a lot in their job or in their family or just in their health or whatever. They're just carrying the weight of their existence, and yet they just trundle through, and they don't acknowledge what they're going through. I just find that just mind blowing.
Yeah, it's it's dark that when you see people coasting. I think it's almost like as men we don't feel things as deeply, and if we don't feel them as deeply, then we don't seek. It's not we don't have as much drive to seek and solve, maybe. But I think you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. So I think the best thing we can do is to be role models, like you said. But yeah, that was a good point. How's the young book going?
Yeah, good, man. Good. I've done 2 of the 4 archetypes. I'm onto the archetype of the spirit now, and then it'll be trickster, and then I'll be done.
What was the second?
The second one was transformation or rebirth.
Oh, okay.
And shall I go on to the last bit now, which comes from
Novak?
Yeah. So we've outlined the problem. We've outlined what I believe from Jung's writing we should do about the problem. And now the last bit is why you should try and solve the problem. And I guess this might help the person that's skeptical about, like, these are all just words, Joel. And I listened to, again, another podcaster that I don't really like. His name's Jay Shetty. He had Novak Djokovic on his podcast, like, quite a long time ago now. But I listened to the episode this week and it was so good. It was so good. It really resonated with me because it was like the athlete thing, but also like the spiritual path intertwining with the path of being an athlete, that I really, really liked. And Novak talked a lot about his holistic approach to being an athlete. Well, not only athlete, but also a person in entirety, right? He said, and I wrote this thing down in exactly. He said that 80 to 90% of the tennis match is won or lost before it even begins. And he said that's decided by where you are internally, right? This internal journey of growth and transformation. That is what really leads to the outcome in the tennis match, 80 to 90% of the time. Because he said, going out there, yes, you're an athlete, you're a tennis player, but beyond that persona of tennis player, there is the being that you truly are. And he said, if that has been worked on, then you're going to be way more successful and perform at a much higher level. Because he made points like, how clear is your mind when you go out onto the tennis court? Where are you at mentally and spiritually, right? How capable are you to weather the inevitable storms that will come up in the match when you lose a set or when you lose a couple of points? And like, how much is your ego attached to an outcome? How much is your emotions going to get flared up when things go wrong or things go right? How over-involved is your left hemisphere? These inner factors that can only be done through the transformation of the self inside, they are the things that really determine how well you can perform. And he sees that being a more grounded, more grateful, more open, more loving being underneath the athlete persona of the tennis player is what makes him a better tennis player. And it's not like he does away with his ego and never looks at it again, but it's more like he manages his ego and works with it from the perspective of that like deeper being that he is. And it's through this inner work that he's become as successful as he has. And I liked that as like a real world example that if you talk to the average layperson, they'll know Novak Djokovic. They'll know how good he is at tennis. They'll know he's one of the best ever. And he himself puts all that down to his inner growth and his inner work. Because the training only happens and the training is only effective because of that inner work.
Wow. 80% is won before the tennis match even starts.
I think there's some truth to that. Even in basketball, I think I can relate to that. In that, like, the team that knows they're the better team on paper and has this kind of like internal compass that's aligned to winning, and they feel like they've just got this, their chance of beating the other team is so much higher. The other team has to have a different level of dog and a different level of character to cause an upset.
So it's like you've trained your character so much that you don't even like need to like stress. You just walk in and your character just does everything because you are that guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Damn. Yeah.
I really do feel like, Jake, that generally speaking, the more work you do on yourself, the easier the outside world becomes. Full stop. Right? The easier social situations are, the easier your work is, the easier it is to look after your health, the easier it is to be in a relationship, the easier it is to have meaningful friendships, the easier it is to not spend money on stupid shit you don't care about, the easier it is to avoid the modern addictions of technology or whatever. If you're grounded internally, and that's difficult because it's immeasurable and it's unscientific and it's woo-woo and it's spiritual and it's whatever, the more like solid you are internally, the easier everything outside is. And I know that just sounds like I'm some hippie, like, knobhead that's just taking some mushrooms and feel like he knows the meaning of life. But genuinely, that comes from personal experience. It comes from great people like Novak Djokovic and great writers that I've learned from. I feel like there's some truth in that.
Well, it starts with consumption, because consumption travels into your mind and your mind then projects that consumption to the future. So if you're consuming like really difficult stuff that is really stretching you, that then goes into your mind and it projects into your future, and your future like reflects what you've been spending all your time on. There's that kind of like hyper true relationship that I feel.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, there's, I mean, what we do, like, there is something in like the hype as well. Because just from a sales context, we basically we we motivate ourselves heavily before we go out and knock on doors to sell. We all jump in a car and the leader will blast drill, and we're all just like shake about that car to hype ourselves up. And yeah, it like kind of works, but also like there's a part that's just like the internal like me that's just sat in my seat just talking to myself like about how like I've got this, like I got it. And that to me I think has worked a little bit better, because the hype works, but it's like it doesn't work as well. I think when you've got this character and you're like hammering it, like I think that's gonna beat the team that has like a short burst.
Mm. Mm. I mean, it's like you can maybe play aggressive music and like hype yourself up to do a bench press 1 rep max, right? But life is more than a bench press 1 rep max. Life's a fucking marathon. Life's it's like a double Ironman. Do you know what I mean? And the motivation for that has to come from somewhere deeper inside. And maybe that's why my approach towards basketball games in Brazil was very different from my teammates, or probably like most other players in that tournament. I wanted to be calm, and I wanted quiet, and I wanted peace, and I wanted to feel present and still, because maybe in that presence, in that stillness, the internal confidence could then bubble up to the surface. And I felt like the crashy music and the adrenaline and the aggression didn't do it for me, because once we're out on the court, that music isn't playing anymore. You know what I mean?
Is there anything like Djokovic does to win before he starts?
Well, he's very um he's very into spiritual practice. So he talked a lot about meditation. He talked a lot about breath work. He talked a lot about journaling. He talked about his wife and his children being primary motivations for what he does. He talked about the importance of sweating the small stuff, of how he um, organizes his supplementation, his diet, and how his training is structured, and his rest and his recovery. And when we went to U Float, the great brand that we work with, and he told us that Djokovic had been in there during Wimbledon. It makes sense that Djokovic is a guy that uses infrared sauna and sensory deprivation tanks. He's almost like he's trying to clear his mind and his spirit so much that when he goes and performs and plays tennis, he's not holding on to anything. There's no other like psychic conflict in his brain. He's not thinking about shit that he hasn't dealt with. Just everything is in flow. Everything is in this calm kind of process, and he's just then able to dance on court and do what he does. It's a real. When I was listening to that, I was like, that's the kind of athlete I want to be. It's hard,
Mm,
and it'll take a lot of work to get to that point, but that's the kind of athlete I want to be.
mm. All right, man. I think this is a good place to round it up. Um, because I think this wasn't bad considering I had one small point and you only had one big point.
Mm.
But yeah, hope everyone enjoyed it as normal, and we'll see you guys next week.